What do Google Stadia and PS5 specs tell us about Project Anaconda and Lockhart? Yes, it's finally happening. For nearly a decade, ever since OnLive rolled out its poorly received game streaming service to limited success, subscription-based cloud gaming has made the journey from overhyped gimmick to practical reality. And now, with Google having announced the Stadia cloud gaming service, the as-yet unannounced 9th-gen consoles are facing competition from a completely unexpected corner. Backed by Google, a company boasting among the most robust network infrastructure in the world, Stadia is no fringe startup company brainchild. It's designed to bring the fight to home consoles. Meanwhile, Sony and company over at PlayStation surprised everyone by not only acknowledging the existence of the PlayStation 5, but seemingly confirming the long-standing rumors that Sony's 9th-gen console would be based on a Navi platform from AMD, providing a generational boost to processing power and enough graphics grunt to drive 4K experiences and a bit beyond. We've heard relatively little from Redmond on their console efforts, but if half the rumors around Microsoft's 9th-gen efforts are to be believed, their ambitions for Xbox are broader than either Sony's or Google's. A premium console with high-end hardware, Project Scarlett, launched alongside a mainstream machine that relies heavily on xCloud functionality, Lockhart. Both Lockhart and Scarlett are very much up in the air, with little in the way of official confirmation. It's interesting to note here that the two areas of focus, premium at-home gaming experiences and mainstream, possibly subscription-based cloud streaming experiences, are exactly what the PS5 and Google Stadia will offer respectively. In this feature, we'll try to better understand Microsoft's Project Scarlett and Lockhart by contextualizing them in terms of the competing offerings from Sony and Google. No matter what the final specifications are, Scarlett will likely provide an experience broadly comparable to the PS5, and Lockhart and xCloud will provide a broadly similar experience to Stadia. One thing that caught our eye during the Stadia announcement was just how close Stadia's GPU spec was to AMD's Vega 56. In the PC space, this cut-down Vega part performs in the same ballpark as the 1660 Ti and GTX 1070. The card's something of a cult favorite in PC circles. Poor out-of-the-box tuning means that most Vega 56s can manage hefty overclocks that bring performance on par with a GTX 1080. Stadia's 10.7 T-flops of compute, however, is marginally less than what the stock Vega 56 is capable of. At stock frequencies, the Vega 56 offers creditable 4K 30 FPS experiences with settings maxed out. With console-quality settings, many AAA titles will run comfortably in the 50 to 60 FPS range. Kronos, the folks who oversee Vulkan, have a listing of hardware that's compatible with the API, and Google's Game Platform Gen 1 is listed as being based on the GCN 1.5 architecture, aka Vega. For Google, it makes sound business sense to leverage the Vega platform. Vega is a great choice for 4K gaming, but neither the Vega 64 nor the 56 sold very well. AMD likely has a large inventory of unsold and binned Vega GPUs lying around, exactly what Google needs to build up a server infrastructure. While Stadia is being powered by Vega, Sony's confirmed that the PS5 will be utilizing a Navi-based GPU, and we'd put our money on Anaconda and Lockhart using the same. We already have a reasonable idea of how Navi will perform. In the PC space, rumors peg the flagship Navi card, the RX 3080 XT, as offering RTX 2070 levels of performance. This would put the top-end Navi part a good 15 to 20 per ahead of Vega 64, and offering somewhere in the ballpark of 15 T-flops of compute power. AMD's GCN core, which Navi is based on, is a known quantity. We know that GCN tops out at 64 CUs, so the 56CU 3080 XT is itself a cut-down product. However, thermals, power consumption, and economics dictate that any Navi parts in the console space will be further binned and clocked more conservatively. A fully enabled Vega 64 GPU delivers around 12.7 T-flops, so 12 T-flops is more or less the lower boundary of what we'd expect from console Navi in the PS5 and Anaconda. Since Navi is a more mainstream-oriented product, it'll be using cheaper GDDR6 memory as opposed to the HBM found in Stadia's Vega 56. GDDR6 speeds are significantly faster than GDDR5, however, and a 14 gigabits per second GDDR6 modules over a 56-bit bus can offer comparable memory bandwidth to the Stadia's HBM. The 9th gen consoles will definitely not be bandwidth starved. But what about Lockhart? The rumor mill points to a pared-down Navi part that hands in 4 T-flops of compute performance, roughly in line with the PS4 Pro. Polaris 11 debuted sometime after the arrival of the performance segment Polaris 10-based parts like the RX 480, with the entry-level RX 460 sporting a mere 14 CUs. With a bump to clock speeds thanks to being built on the 7nm process, we'd expect a 14 to 20 CU Navi part to deliver roughly 4 T-flops of compute power at bargain-based prices. In the PC space, we'd expect Navi 11 to replace RX 560 and RX 460 in the sub-$100 market. In the console space, this would open up the opportunity for Microsoft to deliver Lockhart at a sub-$300 price point. Rumors point to xCloud being leveraged to enhance its graphics and capabilities. We're curious as to how this would accomplish that and whether or not it's even practical. Cloud computing was touted as the Xbox One's ace up the sleeve against the brawnier PS4, but that never panned out. xCloud has been under heavy development, and Microsoft appears determined to not repeat its mistakes here, but we need to see more of xCloud before drawing conclusions. Exactly what processor is Stadia using? Considering how AMD's seemingly cornered the custom system-on-chip market all to itself, you'd be forgiven for thinking that Stadia would pair its GPU with a Ryzen-based AMD processor. However, the folks over at PC Games Network got in touch with AMD, who indicated that it was not supplying CPUs for Stadia. Moreover, Google's PowerPoint on Stadia mentions that the processor in use features hyperthreading, which specifically refers to Intel's implementation of multi-threading. The AMD equivalent is called SMT. Using an Intel processor makes a lot of sense for Stadia as a cloud-based solution. Despite the outing of AMD's Ryzen-based EPYC server chips, Intel maintains a 97% market share in the server market. Google's existing cloud architecture is based on Intel Xeon server farms. It's not surprising, then, that Stadia leverages the vast server resources already available to Google. While running on Xeon servers may make sense for Stadia, it most certainly does not for next-gen consoles. We're likely to see Ryzen-based processors paired with the Navi GPU on all 9th gen platforms. As it stands, 1st and 2nd gen Ryzen have an IPC similar to Ivy Bridge and Haswell parts from Intel, not quite competitive with Coffee Lake. 3rd gen Ryzen, however, built on the 7nm process, promises both higher clock speeds and greater IPC. The rumor mill suggests that the entire 3rd gen Ryzen lineup on PC will be hexa-core and above, thanks WCCF Tech. As such, we wouldn't be surprised to see 8-core Ryzen processors feature in the 9th gen consoles, clocked in the 3 GHz range. This would have a major impact on PC gaming. The way things stand now, 8th gen consoles have such weak processors that a dual-core Intel part is more than enough to double console frame rates in many cases. As such, many gaming builds today have relatively weak CPUs. Higher CPU requirements could mean that many next-gen games might only run at 30 FPS even on today's higher-end rigs. Higher-end CPUs would make deep, simulation-intensive games like Cyberpunk 2077 the norm instead of outliers. While both Anaconda and the PS5 are almost certainly going to have 8-core, 16-thread Ryzen processors, we'd put our money on Lockhart featuring the same CPU configuration, even if it's shipping at a much lower price point. It helps here to have an understanding of AMD's production approach with Ryzen. Intel designs processors around a monolithic die. All of their processors are fully enabled chips, each designed separately. The i5-8400 is a hexa-core chip with all cores enabled. Likewise, the i9-9900K is a fully enabled 8-core chip. Using this approach, Intel discards chips with defects in even a single core. Yields decline precipitously with higher core counts and prices rise exponentially. With Ryzen, AMD adopts the opposite approach. In some ways, Ryzen is the fulfillment of your middle school fantasy of running dual or triple processors. Every Ryzen processor is made up of one or more functional quad-core modules called CCXs, connected together by the Infinity Fabric Mesh interconnect. Due to binning, individual cores on the CCX may be disabled. For instance, the Ryzen 5 1600 in our current rig has 2 CCXs, each with 1 core disabled for a total of 6 functional cores. This allows AMD to take a single, easy-to-manufacture, quad-core module and then scale it up without discarding partially functional units. All Ryzen parts, from the single CCX with 2 cores disabled Athlon 200GE right up to the monstrous 8 CCX 32-core Threadripper 2990WX, are built around this logic. This means that AMD's processor prices scale linearly and not exponentially with core count. How is this relevant in terms of Lockhart though? Well, as we mentioned earlier, Lockhart will arrive at a significantly lower price point than either the PS5 or Anaconda, and this means it'll feature cut-down hardware. Maintaining CPU side parity is much more important in consoles than GPU parity. 2 console SKUs with differing GPU compatibilities, but the same processor can easily run the same game logic and code. The only difference would be that the machine with the less capable GPU would run at lower frame rates or a lower resolution. Having a different CPU makes things much more difficult for developers, especially in terms of maintaining cross-compatibility. The underlying game logic, how assets stream in, how AI is handled, etc., would have to be tweaked, which is much more difficult than just setting a flag for console B to run at, say, 900p. Lockhart sporting a hexacore process is unlikely enough. A cheaper quad-core is just about impossible. Since the start of the 8th gen, there's been a move towards greater multi-threading in games, with developers balancing CPU utilization across 8 cores. It'd be a nightmare to console developers to code game logic that runs across 16 threads and then optimize it to run on a quad-core. Besides, leaks point towards the hexacore 3300G being the lowest-end 3rd-gen Ryzen product. 3rd-gen Ryzen doesn't get cheaper than that. Thanks to the way in which Ryzen parts are produced, hexacore Ryzen processors are built on the same silicon as their octa-core counterparts. This means that there is a lower price threshold around $100. You can't get silicon for any less at all. You need 2 CCXs after all. But the production cost differential between the hexacore and octa-core SKUs isn't likely to be that high. Leaked prices indicate that in the PC space, the octa-core Ryzen 5 3600 will be less than $50 more expensive than the hexacore 3300G. Factoring in bulk purchasing discounts, this would mean that even if it uses the same processor as Anaconda, the bill of materials for Lockhart would be barely 10% more than if it used a less capable processor. We've already talked about how the inclusion of HBM2 in the Stadia does not signal its likely inclusion in the next-gen consoles. However, Google's spec sheet indicates that Stadia will utilize a shared memory pool for the GPU and processor, much like the current-gen consoles. Considering that, even with 12 gigabytes of shared memory, the Xbox One X often features lower resolution textures than the PC. We think that both the PS5 and Anaconda will feature at least 16 gigabytes of shared memory. Considering what Sony said about the PS5 supporting 8K in whatever form, we wouldn't be surprised if both platforms ended up with more memory than this, in the 20 to 24 gigabyte range. Running games at 4K and beyond is a big part of why the premium consoles will sport such a large amount of VRAM. This issue doesn't arise with Lockhart, which will most certainly offer up 1080p experiences. At lower resolutions, you simply don't need that much VRAM. We predict that Lockhart will feature anywhere between 12 to 16 gigabytes of shared memory, quite enough to handle higher resolution assets when running at conventional resolutions. Apart from the boost to CPU power, storage speed is the area that sees the greatest generational leap this time around. Both Sony and Google have confirmed that SSD storage will be used in their respective machines, and we have no reason to believe that Microsoft would do otherwise, at least with Anaconda. SSDs do add quite a bit to the bill of materials, and games aren't getting any smaller. This creates a bit of a catch-22 situation with Lockhart. Dropping SSD capability to 512 gigabytes would reduce costs, but with existing games that take up more than 100 gigabytes of space, Lockhart owners would be limited by the number of games they can have on the system at any given time. While Anaconda and the PS5 are likely to feature 1 terabyte SSDs, Lockhart will either support a smaller capacity SSD or hard drive storage. While Stadia doesn't even exist in physical form, it wouldn't be inaccurate to describe it as the first 9th gen console, or, well, console as a service. The PS5 is even less on the ground. All we have is a handful of statements from Sony, and then there's still no official word from Microsoft about Anaconda or Lockhart, apart from the suggestion that they're working on something. Nevertheless, between the leaks and official hardware reveals, the 9th gen is looking increasingly interesting. Sony, Microsoft, and Google are bringing vastly greater amounts of processing power to the table, paired with capable mid to high-end GPUs. We're looking forward to deeper and of course better-looking gaming experiences in the not-too-distant future. And that about does it for this video. If you enjoyed what you watched and want to see more from GamingBolt, you can always hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell icon next to it. That way you will never miss any of our videos.